Welcome to the Life You Love podcast.
We're your hosts, Grace Lemire
and Erin Convertini.
This podcast is for the dreamers and the doers.
For the women who want to create a life they genuinely love waking up to.
We believe that life's short, so let's build one we love.
You guys have been loving our self-development episodes lately, and I feel like our last few specifically have highlighted a lot of things we're all working on to become the best versions of ourselves. But today we wanted to do something a little bit different. This is going to be a super short and tactical episode where we walk through step by step how to do a life audit and audit exactly where you are currently, because that's so important to take inventory of all of the pillars of our life before we can take steps forward.
I'm super excited for this episode because every time I post about the life audit on my social media, people eat it right up. People love the idea of it. And people have been asking me so many times, how do you do a life audit? So I'm happy that we're breaking it down because it's been super transformative for me. I think I did it for the first time in a business coaching program like 3 years ago or something, or some version of it. And I've done it several times since in different programs and on my own and things. And I think it really is such a good way to look objectively at where you are and figure out where you want to go and then address the gaps. So super hyped for this episode.
Yeah. And I also think it's cool to see how different people do it, because even you and I have totally different processes and just different points of our lives and times that we are doing a life audit, and how we do them is totally different. So we are going to walk through step by step, kind of some steps that you can take to take inventory of all of those pillars of your life and how to decide what the life that you're working toward actually looks like. But then Grace and I have some differences in how we do them. So I think that's cool to see too.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we should start with just in general, like what even is a life audit and why you should do one. So a life audit is basically the process of evaluating where you are at different areas of your life. So you're looking at all the different categories. So maybe career, finances, relationships, spirituality, your self-image, how you view yourself, your mindset. Like you can choose what the categories are. If you Google for a life audit template online, you'll find ones that kind of show all the different categories, or you can swap them out. Once you've evaluated where you're at, you evaluate where you want to go. So the point is basically to objectively look at where you are and get real with yourself about the gap between where you are now and where you want to go. Because a lot of times I feel like we just go through life kind of on autopilot in a way, and we don't take a second to pause and be like, hold on, am I actually on the path to getting where I want to be? And sometimes when you sit down and you do a life audit, which will explain how to like exactly how to do it. But when you do it, sometimes you look at these different areas of your life and you're like, wait, I didn't realize I'm not as satisfied in this area as I thought, or this area of my life needs more attention than I thought, or you know what, I've actually come a lot farther in this area than I thought, and I'm really happy with where I am. So the life audit really helps you look at that objectively and get some data behind it, some numbers, and see like what areas of your life you really want to focus on.
Yeah, I was reading your newsletter yesterday and I saw you were talking about this in or maybe this was yesterday, but you had the drawing in it where it was like you in the center and then all of the different lines to like
decision fatigue audit.
Yeah, it was really cute. But yeah, just talking about like all of the different pillars to see which one is where you are in all of the different pillars of your life. I know for me, this is something that I really focus on when I do, and we'll get into how to kind of like track your progress and all of that. But when I'm like doing my monthly reviews, this is something that I always start with, because we see so much content online about goal setting, which is very forward thinking inherently, right? You're talking about setting goals and what you want to achieve. But I think a lot of people skip over doing, whether it be a life audit, a business audit, whatever it may be, doing an audit of where you are currently in the progress that you have been making. Because if you're just setting goals, but you aren't actually clear on where you are currently, it's going to be really hard to make your goals aligned with where you want to go.
I always use the map analogy when I'm talking to people about this, which is like, let's say you want to drive to the beach. You can't get directions to the beach if you don't know where you're driving from. Like if you don't have a starting point, how the heck is Google Maps going to give you clear directions? There's just an end point and it's like, all right, there you go. Like make it to the beach on vibes and a prayer. There's no path. So that's why I think assessing where you are, because a lot of people, like you said, we get so focused on, okay, I have these goals, I want to get there, and you're really motivated and whatever. But if you don't even know where you're starting, it's really hard to have any sort of evidence that the steps you're taking towards your goals are the right steps in the right order and are going to have any sort of impact for you. And I think sometimes I feel like people get overwhelmed with the idea of a life audit because it does force you to get very real with yourself. It forces you to look at these different areas of your life and be like, okay, I'm not satisfied in this area, or I'm really satisfied here, but I feel like, I'm spending too much time on that area. My satisfaction in that area is forcing me to be consumed by it. And now I can't, I'm not focusing on other areas. So I think it's good to just look at your life from a high level and just figure out what areas of your life you really want to work on. Okay, so then with where we are, kind of transitioning to into looking at that part of it, right? So where you are, the way that I do this, and you can share how you do it too if you do it differently, but the way that I do this is I will look at a certain area of my life. So let's just say finances, for example, and I will rate where I am now on a scale of 1 to 10. And to me, having the numbers behind it makes it very clear. If I am just like, yeah, well, if I'm using adjectives, like I feel pretty good, I feel all right, whatever, that to me isn't as clear versus if I say this is a 7 out of 10, that gives me numbers. And also for me makes it easier to track when I'm making progress. Okay, well, 6 months ago, I was at a 5 out of 10 in this category and now I'm at a 7. I'm making progress that feels good to me. So different categories could be your physical and mental health, your finances, career, relationships, your religion or spirituality. And you're rating it based on satisfaction, how much you're prioritizing that aspect of your life, how good you feel, how fulfilled you feel in that aspect of your life on a scale of 1 to 10. So that's how I assess like where I am.
Yeah, and I think I'm a little less rigid with it, where I think the numbers are really smart, especially when we get into how to decide where you're going and what you want to focus on, because you can be super objective with like, well, one area is a 6, but one area is a 3. So I should probably prioritize the area that's a 3 to get that a little bit higher. So I do like the numbers, but I'm definitely less rigid with it. I think for me, what's the most helpful is like freehand journaling. We've talked about journaling so many times in this podcast. I used to not be a journal girl at all, but now I'm such a journal girl. And I think it's helpful for me to just list out all of these different areas and freehand journal with just kind of like my open and honest thoughts with myself about what's going on, like talking about how I'm feeling, how satisfied I'm feeling in all of these different areas. And then that kind of inherently pulls out, because I know for me, like journaling really it forces my brain to slow down. It forces me to spend a lot of time thinking about one particular thing. So it kind of pulls out those different aspects that I want to improve on moving forward. But then I think like one thing to, again, get you to point 2, which is where you want to go and how you're going to get there, you could kind of sum that up with, okay, well, based on what I wrote in my journal, finances is an area that I'm probably only a 3 out of 10 in, but my friendships, I've been doing a good job prioritizing that. So you can kind of rate them and kind of rank them at the end.
Yeah. When I do the numbers too, I mean, I've always been a numbers girl. Like it just really, I remember when I was making a big pivot in college I was a business major and I wanted to change into doing something different into being an urban studies major in human rights. I remember I went to the like career development center and she had me basically write down everything, all my values, things that were important to me in a career, and then I had to take the 2 different majors that I had and rate each one. So like if finances were important to me on a scale of like 1 to 5, how important was the pay of my future job going to be for me? And I was like, okay, 4 or whatever. And then I would say, okay, on a scale of 1 to 10, is business going to get me to the financial situation that I want? And at the end, basically you would add up all the numbers and see, in my case, I was like, wow, being an urban studies major is actually going to be much better for me. I actually gave it a much higher score than business because of it aligned with all my values. So for me, seeing the numbers gives me like concrete proof of the feelings, I guess helps me like put data behind the feelings in a way. But I also do assess how I feel. So I describe, okay, if I'm on a scale of 1 to 10, if I say I'm a 7 in finances, why is that a 7? What is it? Is it because I have more financial anxiety? Is it because I just am not at the pay that I want? Like identify like why that area, like what's the root of the rating in that area? Because you can't create action steps, right? If you don't know the root. So if you're the reason you rated your finances a 7 is because you're overwhelmed by your debt. that's going to be a very different action plan than if the reason you rated it a 7 is because you don't feel like you're making enough money and you feel like your income potential could be higher. That's going to completely change your action plan. So I assess numerically, and then I kind of assess emotionally, and then I move into figuring out where I want to go. That helps me address the gaps. And what I like to do personally is, you can, like, if you have a vision board, you can go back to your vision board, or if you feel like your vision for your life has never wavered, you can just write it down. But I like to do some sort of visualization meditation that basically just, I get into a meditative state, and then it like prompts me to think about what my dream life looks like, or I'll just meditate to myself on, like, okay, closing my eyes, thinking about my dream financial situation. What does that look like? And I journal about that. I write it all down on the same document, because what I find helpful is, if I'm gauging this on a scale of 1 to 10, I need to know what a 10 might look like. Like, I'm giving it a 7, but what does a 10 actually look like at the end of the day? And so I'll try to visualize what a 10 looks like, and I'll write that down, because then I can assess the gap in between the two.
Yeah, and that's so important too, because when we're talking about action steps, I do think sometimes our judgment gets a little bit clouded by what other people are doing, and then you end up
Mhm.
like taking actions that aren't aligned with the end result. So I think that's so, so important, like putting it all in the same document, whether you are freehand journaling or you pull up a page in Notion that has like, okay, for my finances right now, I am super overwhelmed with my debt, or I haven't saved as much as I would like to, but my end result is having XYZ, whether it be a house with my family or whether it be whatever it may be, to be debt free. You can take actions that are actually aligned with that. I think this is also super prevalent for your career, or if you're doing some type of business venture or a side hustle, you can kind of end up like straying from the actual intended end result because of what other people are doing or the actions that you see other people taking. So yeah, getting super clear on what that dream life would actually look like will tell you the actions that you need to take.
Absolutely. And understanding the gap between where you are and where you're going. Because, for example, let's say you are moving about your life and you're kind of feeling like you might be a 6 out of 10 in terms of relationships. You feel like maybe your friendships aren't that great, your dating life's not that great, whatever, it's not feeling aligned. And then when you actually sit down and you do the life audit, and you're like, okay, yeah, I feel like it is a 6. But then when you really sit there and you think harder, you're like, wow, okay, once I've journaled about the root of this, I feel like the root is disconnection. I'm feeling disconnected in a lot of ways. Okay, well, your action steps now, when you're thinking about your dream relationship scenario where you feel very connected to the community around you, you feel very fulfilled by your relationships, you're nurturing them, then you can look at it and say, okay, my end goal is feeling connected. I'm currently feeling disconnected. What are some things I can do to feel more connected with the people around me? Versus if you didn't think about where you are and where you want to go, you might think that the action steps you need to take to bridge the gap are very different. Or if you didn't reset and realign on that vision, you could fall into the, okay, well, maybe my life, I'm feeling really disconnected right now, but maybe I would feel better if I was in a romantic relationship, or maybe I'd feel better if I just had more friends. And then you're taking action steps of maybe like going and, getting on dating apps and going on dates, that if that's not what you're meant to be doing, right? If that's not going to solve the problem and get you to the actual 10 that you want, or if you're going out and you're just making more friends and then you do those things and you realize this still doesn't fulfill me, it's probably because those action steps weren't actually getting you closer to the vision that you want at your core. It was probably a vision that, yeah, you're taking on from somebody else, or something that you're seeing on social media. So I think it does sound, I think, sometimes silly to do this whole thing of like, where am I and where do I want to go? But I think that's the best way to create an actual plan that makes a difference for your life, versus making a plan based off of what you're assuming about where you are and what you're assuming about where you want to go, without taking the time to genuinely reflect on it.
100%. I think it's so important when you're when you're listing what your dream life would look like in each of these categories, to base it on fulfillment. Like, if I was truly fulfilled in each of these areas, what would that look like? Because fulfillment is kind of like the overall judge of happiness. Like, you could be, for example, you use the example with friendships. You could be sitting there judging where you are with friendships very surface level. Like I have a lot of friends. So in the friendship category, I'm going to give myself an 8 out of 10. But then when you actually sit down and say, if I was really fulfilled from a friendship standpoint, what would that look like? You might be like, okay, well, all my friends and I do is go out, or my friends and I don't actually have that much in common. And I feel like I don't have like deep relationships, or my friends and I don't go out and have new experiences and make new memories. So you might actually realize that from a fulfillment perspective, you're a little bit further off than you'd like to be. And then that could identify the actual action steps that you need to take in order to get there.
Absolutely. And that's when, once you have that information, you have the where you are and the where you want to go, you can start to bridge the gap. And I think one thing I want to note here is when you're looking at your life audit, especially if you're in a place where maybe you're just feeling like really not great on all fronts, for lack of a better word, right? You're sitting down and you're like, dang, all right, 6 out of 10 on relationships, 5 out of 10 on my finances, 5 out of 10 on my career. Damn, like I'm not feeling that good, right? It's kind of, it can feel like, okay, now I need to just like totally un-F my life right now and just like get everything together at once. However, one thing I have learned through doing the 12-week year, which we could probably do a whole episode on, and we'll talk a little bit about it when we talk about tracking progress and doing check-ins. But one thing I've learned, one thing that was in the book that really stuck with me is the author says it takes courage to focus on only a few things at once. And something about that just, it will forever be etched in my brain because it is so true. I think we feel a need to do the most, especially the type of women that listen to this podcast, the women that are like us. We are ambitious and we really believe that we have control over our lives and we want to do everything we possibly can to build a life we genuinely love. And I think sometimes that makes us feel like, okay, we have to address all the problems at once, when in reality, I think you will make far more progress if you focus on a few things at a time. So when you're doing your life audit and you're looking at this and you're like, okay, dang, there's a lot that I don't love here. Or maybe you're like, oh, wow, there's only one area that I'm unsatisfied in. Cool. Pick 2 to 3 areas that you want to focus on and start to brainstorm on ways you can bridge the gap between where you're at and a 10. So if you're like, okay, my finances are at a 6, and I'm going to go back to the example I was using before because I'm overwhelmed with my student loan debt. It's really stressing me out. I feel like I don't have control over it. I don't really understand my numbers. And I feel like my income potential is not as high as it could be. So over the next 12 weeks, 6 weeks, whatever timeline you want to set for yourself, just make sure it's realistic because these things will take time to actually change depending on what they are, right? Okay, over the next 12 weeks, I'm going to do the following things that are going to get me clarity on these things. So I'm going to sit down, I'm going to open up my student loan accounts. I'm going to look at all the numbers. I'm going to write this all down. I'm going to see if there's an opportunity maybe to refinance one of my private student loans so that I can get a lower monthly payment, or whatever it is. Figure out what those steps are. I'm going to try to see if I can renegotiate with my company, my pay or my raise, or ask for more opportunity at work so that I can get a higher pay, or take on a side hustle, or whatever it might be. Come up with what those action steps are that you can use to bridge yourself from where you are to where you want to be. And then know in your brain, we talk about decision fatigue a lot on here and on my page as well. Know that the other focus areas that you've chosen not to focus on, the other categories of life, it doesn't mean that's never a priority to you. It doesn't mean you're never going to address them. It just means that right now you're choosing to do right by yourself and focus on just a few things at once. I'm not going to overload my own brain and stress myself out by trying to reinvent my entire life in the next 6 weeks. I'm going to take 2 to 3 things and I'm going to go ham on them because I owe it to myself to do that, because the focused work is going to get you further. So yeah, list out what you think will help you get from where you are, whatever rating you have, to a 10. It doesn't mean that by the end of whatever timeline you give yourself, you have to be at a 10. I think that's very unrealistic. But can you get yourself from a 6 to a 7? Can you get yourself from a 3 to a 5, right? Can you get yourself up a little bit to a place where that area of your life feels better? You feel more fulfilled by the end of whatever timeline you give for yourself.
Yes, for sure. And I also think it's so important to remember that these pillars of our life, a lot of times they pour into each other. So when you're picking 1 or 2 focus areas, you might inherently up your score in another pillar just by focusing
Mhm.
on something else. So, for example, let's say one pillar that you really want to focus on is your self identity, your self worth. And one of your action steps is you want to start putting yourself more together throughout the week. I know this is something we talked about this in one of our last episodes, but
Mhm.
the confidence that comes from putting yourself together on a daily basis and not walking around in sweatpants. But let's say that that is a focus area for this month or the next 12 months. I know, Grace, you do the 12-week year.
Mhm.
I'm more so like on a monthly basis, and we can talk about that with our review processes. But let's say that this month your big focus is to focus more on your self identity and your self worth, and you have the goal to get ready every single day and care about your appearance more. You might inherently up your friendship score because now that you're ready all the time and you're feeling more confident, you're asking your friends to go do things after work. You are not lounging on the couch all weekend, every weekend, which was literally what I did all weekend, which is fine. But you might ask your friends to do more because you're just feeling more confident because you focused on your self identity and your self worth. So I think that can be a result there as well. But then, yeah, when it comes to the check ins and the reviews and how frequently you want to do this, whether it be 3 months or whether it be 1 month, I know 1 month is really impactful for me because it forces me to get really granular about what I actually have to do on a weekly basis. I'm definitely the person where like the amount of time that it takes me to do something will expand to how much time I give it. So if I give something 12 weeks, I'm going to put it off until the last 4 weeks anyway. So I might as well only give myself 4 weeks. But then just being really honest with yourself about, okay, these are the 3 action steps that I'm going to take in the month of May. And then at the end of May, we're going to do another kind of mini life audit to audit, okay, what did I accomplish this month and what do I want my focus area to be next month?
Absolutely. I think I mean, if you follow me on Instagram or TikTok, you guys have probably seen my WAMs, which stands for Weekly Accountability Meeting. It's an idea that comes from the 12-week year. And basically, the concept, just loosely, of the 12-week year, since we're talking about it, is if basically the author says that you'll get far more done in 12 weeks than you can in a year, because when we have annualized goals, we tend to be like, well, I've got all year to do it. You just, like you said, the time horizon you give yourself to, you'll just end up expanding when you take those action steps. And so he says, treat every 12 weeks like it's its own year. And so, if those 12 weeks were a year, like, how would you act? What would you be able to get done? How would you move? And so you pick a couple of focus areas for each 12 weeks. And he gets really granular, where I think you're supposed to do like weekly action items that are like kind of different and whatever. I kind of did it a bit more loosely, more through the lens of like minimizing decision fatigue. So I picked my focus areas for Q1. It was like moving, settling into my place, and starting to make friends. That's my focus. I'm not going to work 60 hours a week. I'm not going to, you know what I mean? Like, go ham on all these different areas. I'm going to focus on those things and give myself the space and freedom to do that. And then Q2, I was like, okay, I'm going to focus on business and my routines and my health. For me, that looks like, okay, I'm being smarter about tracking my analytics on my social media, and I'm looking more at my content critically and being like, what worked, what didn't, how can I refine it? I'm releasing new products, like things like that. And for me, I check in weekly because that's what the 12-week year says to do. And I want to try it and see how I like it. And I do think it's good. I think weekly it's very often, and depending on the type of goal that you have, it might not make sense. For me, it's easy to slot it in my calendar on a recurring basis. That's one thing I've learned about myself. If it's in my calendar, like every week or whatever, it makes it easier for me to follow through with it. But whatever framework works for you for checking in, like let's say you do your life audit and you're like, okay, I'm going to add it in my calendar in 2 weeks. I'm going to check in with myself and see where I'm at. Or if weekly works better for you or whatever it is, come up with a framework that works for you to check in. Because if you're not checking in, then how the heck do you know if you're actually getting closer to, a 10 out of 10 in that category? You won't. You won't know if you're not measuring the progress.
Yeah, I love that. I think we should do an entire episode on our calendars and how we structure them and organize them, because I know that's a question that I get all the time, is how to make sure we're like working toward our goals and taking the actions that we say we're going to take and all of that. So we could definitely do an entire episode on that. But we wanted to end this episode just by talking a little bit about kind of like embodiment and how we're going to get ourselves closer to that dream life. I know you talked about the visualization meditations, and I'm not so much on that front. I do like the vision boards and all of that. And I do have visuals for where my quote unquote unquote dream life wants to go. But I think one way to just kind of sum up this episode and sum up how we're going to get closer in whatever pillar that we are choosing to focus on this month, this quarter, is just the idea of you'll get to where you want to go a lot faster if you are embodying the version of yourself that is a 10 in that pillar. Yeah, I think that this is just a good reminder, just acting as if you already have what you're trying to accomplish. I think that's a good way to sum up this episode. But we just wanted to keep this one quick and short so that you guys can take the time to actually go do your own life audit and let us know in Spotify the results of that and what comes of it, because I know it might like seem a little bit silly to like write everything down and like list it all out, but it actually is super insightful. And we encourage you guys to all do it after listening to this episode. But leave your questions and comments in Spotify, or you can DM us on Instagram at The Life You Love Pod. We love hearing from you guys. Thanks for tuning into the podcast, and until next week.